Welcome to another episode of our podcast series on India, Japan, and China's relationship on trade, tensions, and Taiwan factor in the Indo-Pacific. I am your host, Dr. Ulupi Bora, a distinguished fellow at Center for Joint Warfare Studies. Today, we are going to explore in our conversation the evolving triangular dynamics of India, Japan, and China, and also we are going to emphasize on the economic security, supply chain resilience, and maritime strategies in the Indo-Pacific. Today, we have a very special guest who needs no introduction when we discuss China. And she is none but Professor Sriparna Pathak. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bora. It's wonderful being here and speaking with you.
Thank you, ma'am. A short bio of ma'am I would wish to read. Professor Sriparna Pathak is a professor of China Studies and the founding director of the Center for Northeast Asian Studies at OP Jindal Global University. She also serves as senior fellow at the Jindal Institute and associate director at the Modwani Jadeja Institute of American Studies. She is associated with Taiwan's Double Think Lab as a regional partner, working on tracking China's influence operations. The professor is a recipient of the CITW Community Fund from Taipei's Double Think Lab. Her latest book, Strategic Evolution of Quad, From Ocean Fort to Asian NATO 2026, offers a compelling analysis of the Quad's transformation. Ma'am, I really want to start our discussion by asking you that despite India and Japan having a very strong strategic partnership, yet if we see our trade, India and China's trade is quite higher. So what do you think? What are the reasons behind there? Do you think there is a very conventional structural constraint? Or if you could share your views on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It is definitely structural in nature. It's historical because Japan's trade with China is significantly higher than Japan's trade with India because of deep-rooted economic integration, scale differences, structural factors. In fact, Japan's trade with China is about 15 times higher than what it trades with India. This is because of historical and established integration because China had a head start. It started from 1978 onwards. And given that Japan had hoped that it would be a win-win cooperation, back in 1978, it wasn't really possible to envisage that China would engage in weaponization of trade and all sorts of economic coercion. There has been a historical connect. In terms of economic scale or complementarity as well, there is a higher linkage between Japan and China than with Japan and India. Now, Japan has definitely tried to move its reliance away. And, just some examples are the 2022 Economic Security Promotion Act and them actually encouraging their Japanese investors to shift away. But that is something which is very recent. It is ongoing. With India, there is emerging trade in critical sectors. But if you just look at rare earths, China controls about, 90% and more than that of the manufacturing of rare earth metals. So given that China planned ahead and it could manage to fool the world, if I may use the term, that it's going to be a benign power when it does become a power, this sort of thing changed. But I would still say now that that sort of understanding is there and Japan is looking to diversify. It is promoting diversification. India has understood there's a China plus one strategy. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, this should be in a better situation.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Very nuanced and of course, starting from the historical connect, the planning ahead. So, their relationship in the economic sector is yes. But I think diversifying is significant and Japan should realize that. So coming to my next question, in the event of a PLA Navy blockade of Taiwan, what is likely to be the impact of India-China and India-Japan trade relationship?
That is something which Xi Jinping hasn't planned because he wants a peaceful reunification of Taiwan with the so-called motherland. If that does happen and moves beyond the gray zone escalations which China is currently engaging in, then to begin with, China itself would suffer and its own GDP would stumble. And, Bloomberg has suggested that roughly about 10% of global GDP would also come crashing down because A, there would be halted Taiwanese exports. B, there would be skyrocketed shipping, insurance costs, energy import disruptions, like, LNG or oil would have to be rerouted. Semiconductor shortages would happen. China itself would suffer to begin with. If it contracts by, say, about 7 to 11%, its own, its own its own identity as a manufacturing platform of the world would undergo a serious change, which would position India better. Of course, India's trade would get affected because roughly about 50%, 55% of India's international trade passes through the Taiwan Straits. That would go for a toss. But it would also compel India to take advantage of the situation. I think countries like Japan or other like-minded partners, be it Australia, I think we should prepare for a worst-case scenario. I think Japan has been preparing in its own ways. We've seen Madam Sanae Takeji's comments, etc. Taiwan, of course, is apprehensive of a full-scale blockade and so on. India also, in not so many outspoken ways, has been preparing. But I think one thing which we should focus on is how do we manage the situation in terms of trade, creation of those sorts of ports or linkages or flight routes so that trade doesn't get disrupted. While partners keep thinking of what to do with the situation, that would be the best way forward. How long would China be able to sustain that war effort if its own economy comes crashing? That's another thing we should wonder about. So it's not going to be a very super sustained effort from China, but God forbid if that happens, I think like-minded partners in the region should be prepared.
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, I think what I have understood is connectivity plays a very crucial role now, be it the port infrastructure or be it air. Yeah, this is an important aspect. So coming to our next question, ma'am, what do you think? What are the way ahead? What initiatives India can take in terms of securing its series of communications so that, we have an uninterrupted trade with Japan, Taiwan, and Philippines?
So I think, as you correctly said, we should start or take a greater long-term view of how to secure our sea lanes of communication so that the trade flows remain uninterrupted with Japan, with Philippines, with Taiwan. This would need a multi-layered approach. All partners, be it Philippines, be it Japan, be it India, we are all heavily reliant on the Taiwan Straits, or what China calls the South China Sea. If there are disruptions, they would, impact trade in semiconductors, which is the thing in this epoch of history. So, building our own resilience in terms of, pushing forward our semiconductors mission and getting a head start if a worst case scenario happens. What can we also do? We need to strengthen forward presence and surveillance. We could leverage the Andaman and Nicobar Command, which is India's only tri-service operational commander. It could be a fulcrum for monitoring, for influencing choke points. Second, bilateral and unilateral partnerships. With Japan, we could build on some of these existing frameworks like 2021, we had this ACSA for logistics, then 2025 defense cooperation initiatives. There have to be more joint patrols and so on. With Philippines, capitalize on defense exports. BrahMos missiles have been delivered already. Expand to joint MDA training exercises. India could position itself as a bridging partner in this scenario, maybe bring in Philippines, Japan, and Taiwan. With Taiwan, there has to be greater discussions on semiconductors. We have started quite a lot now in Assam. Yeah, we have fabs coming up. In Gujarat, we have fabs coming up, and so on. But this needs to be speeded up because we don't really know when exactly China wants a full takeover, but it will happen sooner than later.
Thank you, ma'am. So the concern for the supply chain related to semiconductors is very crucial. That means
Absolutely.
we need to focus on that aspect more than anything else, probably, because I think the country now which is going to control the tech is going to have a huge impact at the global level.
Yeah, which is why we are also having the AI summit. There's a lot of focus on tech because now tech is the new game changer.
Yes, let's say that is the new oil.
Actually, it's the new oil.
So coming to our next question, ma'am, given that there is a trade deficit between India and China, and it is approximately 100 billion US dollars. So, ma'am, what do you think? What are the ways or what initiatives India could take in order to cushion the impact of a potential disruption in the Indo-Pacific?
See, if there is a disruption, when it happens, it will spike all sorts of import costs. It'll cause shortages in critical inputs, which China has already been at. It'll fuel inflation. It'll disrupt manufacturing, autos, electronics, renewables. All of this will face a deficit. So what we can do, friendshoring, which also has to be coupled with supply chain diversification. We've been talking of China plus one strategy, in which Vietnam is positively seen, in which India has been seen. If we could prioritize alternatives in ASEAN, like say in Vietnam, in Indonesia, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and domestic production, and focus specifically on electronics or semiconductors, I think this would be one step forward. Leveraging minilateral framework, strengthen Quad. I know that the Quad summit didn't happen last year, but the format still exists. So sooner than later, it's going to come back into play. So these discussions within the Quad have to be started. Diversifying export markets. Now, because of the double whammy which the world faced from US's illiberal economics and China's, last year India offset all these deficit pressures by boosting exports to EU, yes, West Asia, Africa, ASEAN. This has to continue. This cannot be scaled back and this cannot be stopped. Bolstering domestic manufacturing self-reliance is the only way forward. We've learned very hard lessons in the last few years, and if we forget our lesson, it's going to be a complete doomsday scenario for us. Strengthening maritime and strategic resilience, investing in Andaman and Nicobar Command, forward presence, align or getting partners to talk more about what are India's Mahasagar initiatives, how do we cooperate leveraging that. These are some of the situations, some of the steps which we can use. So hopefully this will be a preparation for a worst case sort of scenario.
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, you have touched on some of the very important aspects, starting from, semiconductors, electronics, supply chain. Then you spoke about the export market also. And currently, when we are talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliance, India is today, developing a market which is, which can attract definitely, foreign investment. So these are very crucial and critical areas which you have spoken about. And in the upcoming times, we are pretty sure that, when we are looking towards, becoming a global power, and we are talking about Viksit Bharat 2047, I think these all the areas which you have mentioned today is going to play a very, critical role. And what I have analyzed today from our discussion today is that Indo-Pacific is not just a maritime construct, but it is the center of global trade today. And supply chain, as you have mentioned, then the maritime strategies, you have mentioned about Sagar, then Mahasagar. I think everybody is going to play its role in its way. So, ma'am, you have written a book which is yet to be launched. The title of the book is Strategic Evolution of Quad, from Ocean Froth to Asian NATO, 2026, which offers a compelling analysis of the Quad's transformation. Could you discuss or could you, share certain aspects of the book with us?
Sure. See, Quad is a very important multilateral grouping, and the late Shinzo Abe had first spoken about it, and Japan had taken the lead, and then we had the first iteration of the Quad. Then in between, in 2008, because of Australia's desire to align closely with China, there was a brief interregnum, after which we saw the Quad in the new avatar, in which we call the Quad 2.0. Quad is it's a very important grouping for the economic, technological, and overall security of the Indo-Pacific. Given that we now see heightened aggression in the Taiwan Straits, in the South China Sea, across various parts in the Indo-Pacific, across India's borders as well, it is important that like-minded partners come together and discuss. When the Quad had first come up, then China had said it's nothing but ocean froth and it's going to dissipate with time. Cut to 2025, it says it's the Asian NATO. So what we try to do in this book of mine is that we try to understand what has been the change which led China to shift away from calling it ocean froth, which is, well, useless and will dissipate with time, to calling it the Asian NATO, as formidable as an Asian NATO. Something must have happened. So what in this book, what we try to do is that we have perspectives not just from the 4 Quad countries, India, Japan, Australia, and the US, but we also have certain submissions from partner countries, like-minded countries like France or Italy. How do they see the Indo-Pacific? And could their countries' perspectives align with those of the Quad? The Quad has done quite a lot of things, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of vaccine diplomacy, STEM education. These are real things. These are capacities which countries need to build. Now, these 4 countries have come together, and all 4 are democracies, and they are creating that sort of a net security in the Indo-Pacific region. So, and that showcases this platform as being much better than certain aggressive countries which claim to create a lot of opportunities but end up creating only dependence. So the Quad is an important platform, and that's what I've tried to bring out in my book.
Lovely, ma'am. We are really hopeful to read your book, and we are very thankful to you for giving us these very analytical and insightful points. So, what I have understood upon this conversation, the significance of emerging technology, especially that you have focused on semiconductors and the supply chain. So, a country who has a control over this emerging techs today, like we have mentioned, is the new oil. We have an influence at the global level. Second thing you mentioned about export market, and then today also we have a growing market. India has a growing market, and we have a strong political will also. So I think these are all incentives to attract more foreign investment also, and we have actually all the capabilities so that we can also enhance our trade with Japan, and Japan could also think of diversifying its trade, its economic aspects, especially looking into the market perspective. And the third important thing is also we have the skilled labor today. India has the youngest workforce, and Japan has a declining demography. So I think considering every aspect, our relationship is only going to strengthen. But then I would like to say that the Indo-Pacific is not just a maritime construct. Today it is the center of global trade. And if we talk that there is a strategic competition or intensifying rivalry, but at the end of the day, whether it be India, Japan, or China, we are all economically interconnected. And with this, I would like to end our podcast today. But I am very much thankful to our listeners. Stay connected with us, stay informed, and stay strategic. Thank you.
Thank you again, CENJOWS and Dr. Borao. It was wonderful talking to you.